We were on a double date at the Cheesecake Factory, me and my fiancé, my buddy, and his girl. When I bent down to grab a napkin, I saw my fiancé's foot between his legs. He said, "She started it, dude." When I slowly sat back up, my fiancé. I always thought double dates were harmless. You show up, talk about work, complain about the drive, split appetizers, and pretend the Cheesecake Factory menu does not overwhelm you even though it absolutely does. That night was supposed to be that simple. I had made a reservation because Tessa said she wanted a normal night after weeks of wedding planning stress. Brad and Kaylee were the obvious couple to invite because they had been together for a little over a year and acted like the stable pair in our friend group. I trusted Brad, and I thought Tessa liked Kaylee. Everything looked balanced. That illusion lasted less than 20 minutes. We were seated in one of those wide booths where everyone is slightly too close, but it felt fine at first. Tessa leaned into my shoulder, playful and light, the way she used to be when we first started dating. Brad took the seat across from me. Kaylee sat beside him with her purse tucked under her arm like she did when she was stressed, but trying to look social. I remember thinking they looked a little stiff, but I brushed it off because everyone had been overloaded with work lately. The first sign something was off came when Tessa ignored 2 questions in a row. Brad asked what she wanted to order. She didn't answer. Kaylee tried to include her in a story about a coworker. Tessa just stared at the drink menu. She said she was tired, but her foot kept bouncing like she had more energy than all of us. I chalked it up to nerves, assuming she was thinking about the wedding scheduling problems. If only it had been that simple. About 20 minutes in, the server came by with a fresh stack of napkins after dropping a drink. One napkin slid to the floor, and I bent down to grab it. That movement changed everything. On the way up, I saw Tessa's leg extended under the table toward Brad. Not near him, not brushing him accidentally. Her foot was nestled between his legs like it belonged there. Brad jerked slightly when he noticed me, and the look on his face was nothing like shock. It was the expression people wear when they've been caught in the moment and can't pretend their way out. I froze there for a second because my brain struggled to pair the image with the reality I thought I lived in. When I looked at Brad directly, he gave this weak half-smile that wasn't even apologetic. More embarrassed than anything. Then he muttered something that was supposed to be an explanation, but sounded more like surrender. He said she started it. My ears rang so loud I barely heard the rest of his words. I didn't stand up right away. I took a breath, then another, because I wanted to make sure I wasn't inventing the scene out of paranoia. When I finally rose back into my seat, Tessa quickly pulled her foot away as if the table had burned her. She acted like nothing had happened. She kept her face calm, almost uninterested, but her hands were trembling. Kaylee stared back and forth between the 3 of us as if she had walked into a conversation halfway through and needed subtitles. I didn't give anyone time to pretend. I asked Tessa what she thought she was doing. No raised voice. No threats. Just the question. She blinked fast, trying to figure out what I had seen and how much she could deny. Then she claimed she had stretched her leg and accidentally made contact. It was an excuse that would have made sense if I had not almost collided with her foot still resting exactly where it shouldn't have been. Kaylee didn't buy it either. She demanded Brad tell her if this was some kind of joke or if something had been going on. Brad stammered, trying to produce a version of the story that sounded innocent, but everything he said contradicted everything happening on his face. The tension at the table spiraled before the appetizers even arrived. The people in the booth next to us kept glancing over. The server approached twice and quickly backed away. I felt like I was standing in the center of a small earthquake, steadying myself while the people who were supposed to be closest to me shook the ground. Tessa tried to grab my hand, insisting I misunderstood. She said she had been annoyed that Brad was crowding her space under the table and had nudged him. That explanation made even less sense than the first one. Kaylee pushed her chair back and stood, shaking with a mixture of confusion and anger. She accused Brad of acting strangely for weeks and said she had tried talking to him about boundaries with other women, but he dismissed her. She said she thought she was imagining things because she didn't want to seem jealous. Then she did something none of us expected. She pulled up her phone, opened a message thread, and handed it to me. They weren't blatant cheating messages, not explicit, but they showed Tessa and Brad had texted privately weeks before to meet about something they both needed to discuss without the others. When Kaylee first saw it, Brad claimed it had been about planning a surprise for me. Except nothing in the thread matched that. It wasn't incriminating enough to call proof, but clear enough to signal something had been happening behind the scenes. I handed the phone back without saying anything. I didn't need more. The image under the table had said plenty. Tessa's face went pale when she realized Kaylee had pulled her into the situation too. She tried to redirect everything toward Kaylee, saying she was stirring drama and trying to ruin the night. That only made things worse, because then Kaylee fired back with details she had kept to herself. She said she overheard Brad on a call a couple of nights earlier, whispering about how things were getting complicated, and when she confronted him, he said she misheard. The table became a battlefield of half-truths and frantic contradictions. I didn't raise my voice. I just told Tessa I wanted the truth. She didn't offer it. She gave more excuses, more denial. She insisted we talk later in private, but I refused to leave the situation to rot in the dark. I told her there wasn't going to be a private talk unless she acknowledged what I saw with my own eyes. That's when she snapped and said I was being dramatic. The word dramatic cut the last thread holding me to the table. I stood up without another word, and the sound of my chair sliding echoed across the room. A server stepped aside when he saw my expression. Kaylee followed me out first, too shocked to stay. Brad remained glued to the booth like someone had nailed him there. Tessa came after me in the parking lot, calling my name, demanding I let her explain. Her voice bounced off the cars, desperate and shaky. She said it was nothing, that I misunderstood, that Brad misinterpreted her movement. She tried to grab my arm, but I stepped back and told her I didn't need rehearsed lines. She kept repeating that it was an accident, but the more she said it, the less it sounded possible. She became more frantic when she realized I wasn't responding to her script. She tried shifting blame to Brad. She said he misread her. She said he probably wanted it and imagined something that wasn't there. She said anything she could think of to keep me standing there long enough for her to rebuild control of the situation. I told her one thing before walking to my car. I said I didn't want a story. I wanted the truth. She couldn't give it. And that silence told me everything I wasn't ready to admit. When I left the parking lot that night, I expected silence from Tessa. Instead, she called nonstop until my phone heated in my hand. I didn't answer. I drove for almost an hour just to let my thoughts slow down enough for logic to catch up. The image under the table replayed every few seconds, and every time I tried to explain it away, another detail showed up to shut that down. The calm face she gave me during the date. The twitch in Brad's expression. Kaylee's messages. It all formed one line, pointing to the place I didn't want it to go. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the light on my porch was on. I knew instantly it wasn't good news. Tessa was sitting on the top step with her knees pulled up, surrounded by bags that looked hastily packed. She must have left the restaurant and driven straight to her apartment, gathered everything she could grab, and come here before I even finished my first loop around the freeway. She looked like she had been crying, though she tried to erase every trace of it the second she saw my car. I didn't rush to her. I locked the car slowly, walked past her bags, and told her we weren't having a conversation until she stopped trying to control it. She followed me into the living room, talking fast, trying to fill every second with explanations. She said she panicked. She said she knew how bad it looked, but it wasn't what I thought. She said she didn't want to go home because Kaylee had sent messages to her family the moment she ran out of the restaurant. According to Tessa, her family was furious and she came to me because I was the only one who would believe her. I didn't respond to that last part because I didn't believe anything yet. I pointed at the couch and told her to sit. She kept pacing instead, like staying still would force her to tell the truth. She said her mother was coming over because she didn't want Tessa to be alone. That surprised me because her mother, Dana, never drove anywhere late at night. Usually, she avoided drama until she could prepare for it. The fact that she was already on her way meant she knew something significant. While Tessa talked in circles, I stepped outside for air. As soon as I closed the door behind me, my phone buzzed with a text from Kaylee. She apologized for the chaos and said she and Brad had broken up the moment they got home. She said she planned to block him after packing her things. She didn't describe the fight, but she didn't have to. I knew she had seen enough in that moment under the table to end everything. I replied that I appreciated the honesty she showed at the restaurant. She said she had held back from telling me something earlier because she didn't want to ruin our engagement unless she was sure. She said she wasn't sure until that night. That message stuck with me. When I walked back inside, Dana was already in my living room. She moved past me without a greeting, her expression tight, her jaw locked. She didn't look confused. She looked tired in a way people look when something they've been avoiding finally catches up with them. She asked Tessa what she had done. Not what happened. Not what I saw. What she had done. The phrasing told me Dana wasn't surprised. Tessa insisted everything was exaggerated. She said she stretched her leg. Brad misunderstood. Kaylee stirred it up to make her look bad. She delivered the same broken script she had used outside the Cheesecake Factory, like repetition could turn it into reality. Dana didn't buy it for a second. She asked me what I saw. I told her exactly what happened, without emotion, without adding any weight. Just the simple explanation that her daughter's foot was between another man's legs. Dana closed her eyes in a way that told me this was not new behavior for Tessa. A moment later, she sat down heavily and said one sentence that blew open the second twist of the night. She said I needed to understand that this wasn't the first time. Her voice wasn't dramatic. It was resigned, like she hated saying it, but couldn't protect her daughter anymore by staying silent. Tessa spun toward her mother, furious. She demanded to know why she would tell me anything. She insisted her past didn't matter. Dana ignored her and kept talking, explaining that Tessa had a history of testing boundaries when she felt insecure. She said she had lost 2 past relationships because of it, and that her parents had covered for her both times because they didn't want her reputation ruined among family friends. She said they hoped she had grown out of it. I stared at Tessa, waiting for her reaction. She didn't deny it. She didn't admit it either. She just froze, lips pressed together, eyes locked on the floor. It was the first real silence she gave me since the restaurant, and it said more than any lie she could produce. I asked her directly how long she had been crossing boundaries with Brad. She snapped back to life, insisting it was never anything, and that the messages Kaylee showed me were about getting advice for wedding stress. She said they met once for 10 minutes at a coffee shop because she wanted a male perspective on something. She said Brad misunderstood. She said a lot of things, but every word felt empty. Dana took a slow breath and told me another piece of the truth Tessa didn't want revealed. She said Tessa had been planning to ask me for a relationship break after the wedding. She heard her talking about it with her sister, Morgan. Apparently, Tessa wanted time to think about her feelings, but she didn't want to cancel the wedding because she was afraid of losing deposits, gifts, and the image of stability she had built. I felt something cold settle in my chest when she said that. The night wasn't just about what I saw under the table. It was about what had been building behind my back with slow, deliberate steps. I wasn't losing a fiancée. I had been losing her long before that moment at the restaurant. I just didn't notice. Before I could respond, the front door opened again and Morgan stepped in. She looked like she had been crying the entire drive. She rushed toward her sister and told her to stop lying. She said she wasn't going to let this become another situation where Tessa dragged everyone into her spiral. She told her to take accountability. Tessa tried to shout over her, but Morgan kept going. She looked directly at me and said she had overheard her sister and Brad on the phone 2 weeks earlier. They weren't planning anything physical, but the emotional tension was unmistakable. She said she warned Tessa that she was pushing a boundary that would break everything. Tessa ignored her and told her to stay out of it. When Morgan finished, the room went silent in a way that felt solid and final. I asked Tessa if she had anything left to say. She stared at me, searching for a version of the truth she could present that would keep me there. She couldn't find one. She walked into the hallway, grabbed one of her bags, and told me she didn't want to stay if I wasn't going to fight for us. That statement didn't land the way she intended. It made something inside me settle. I told her there was nothing to fight for if she couldn't tell the truth. She didn't try again. She just walked out, slamming the door behind her. It wasn't the confrontation I expected when the night started, but it was the one that tore down everything I thought I knew. The morning after Tessa stormed out felt strangely still. I expected anger or grief, but instead there was a heavy clarity settling over everything. It didn't calm me, but it gave me direction. I needed to get ahead of the mess before rumors twisted reality. Our friend group wasn't large, and news traveled through it faster than common sense. I didn't want people hearing some warped version from Brad or Tessa where I became the unreasonable fiancé who lost control over a misunderstanding. By mid-morning, my phone was already buzzing. Some messages were from friends who had heard bits of what happened at the restaurant. Others came from people asking if the wedding was still happening. One text from Chris, one of my closest friends, said he hadn't slept after getting a frantic call from Kaylee and that we all needed to talk as a group before things spiraled. That sounded reasonable, so we agreed to meet at his apartment later that afternoon. When I arrived, Kaylee was already there, sitting stiffly on the couch with a blanket around her shoulders even though the place wasn't cold. She looked exhausted but steady. Chris stood in the kitchen, making coffee like he was bracing for impact. Brad wasn't there yet, which made the room hold its breath a little. Kaylee didn't waste time. She said she had spent the entire night replaying everything and realized she had ignored too many signs. She said she didn't want to blame Brad entirely for the foot incident, but she had doubts long before that night. She confessed she had found messages between Tessa and Brad weeks earlier. Nothing explicit, but enough for her to ask Brad directly whether he was developing feelings for someone else. He told her she was being insecure. That detail made the room heavier. Then Kaylee said something that dropped the third twist so hard it felt like a snap inside the space. She said Tessa had been bragging to one of her co-workers weeks earlier that Brad always flirted with her, and she wondered what would happen if she pushed a little. According to the co-worker, Tessa laughed about it like it was a game she could play without consequences. It hit me like a cold wave. Not because I thought she was above that. At that point, nothing surprised me, but because she had been joking about it while I was out choosing wedding tuxedos. She wasn't confused or overwhelmed. She was experimenting with people like they were props for her amusement. Then the door opened, and Brad stepped inside. He looked like he hadn't slept at all. His hair was a mess, his shirt half tucked, and he had that empty stare people get when their world collapses faster than they can process. Before anyone asked, he said he knew what everyone must think, and he wouldn't deny any of it. He said he had tried to push Tessa away at first. He said she kept crossing lines even when he told her to stop, and he didn't know how to tell Kaylee because he thought it would ruin everything. He admitted he was weak. Kaylee stared at him like she wasn't even looking at a person anymore, just at the outline of someone she used to trust. Brad reached for her hand. She pulled it back. He didn't try again. Then he turned to me and apologized, not with excuses, but with the dull, broken honesty of someone who finally ran out of ways to hide. He said he had no intention of letting anything progress, but he didn't pull away fast enough or strongly enough, and he didn't say anything when he should have. He admitted he should have told me the moment he felt something was off. He said he avoided it because he didn't want to be responsible for damaging my engagement. That excuse didn't impress me. Protecting my engagement would have required integrity, not avoidance. Before I could respond, there was loud knocking at the door. Chris opened it cautiously, and Tessa rushed inside with her hair tangled, still wearing the clothes from the night before. She must have driven directly from wherever she slept. The second she saw the group together, she snapped into this defensive posture like we had staged an intervention behind her back. She stormed toward Kaylee and began accusing her of spreading lies. Kaylee didn't flinch. She stood, removed the blanket, and faced Tessa directly. She told her she wasn't lying, wasn't exaggerating, wasn't twisting anything. She told her she wasn't going to carry the burden of everyone's secrecy anymore. Tessa's voice rose. She insisted that she was the real victim. She said Brad had flirted with her first. She said she had only teased him because she was stressed. She said I was overreacting. She said every version she could think of except the truth. When Brad finally spoke, it cut through the noise. He said Tessa had initiated everything. He said she wasn't just teasing. She was pushing until he felt trapped. He said she used the wedding as a shield, assuming no one would suspect anything because she was engaged. Tessa wheeled toward him with disbelief, like she couldn't accept someone else breaking her narrative. She stepped closer, her hands clenched, and Chris moved between them before the situation escalated into something physical. She shouted that he was lying to save himself, that he was weak, that everyone was turning against her because they were jealous of her relationship. It spiraled fast. Every time she denied something, someone provided the missing detail. Every time she tried to shift blame, it bounced back at her. She became so frantic she couldn't form coherent sentences. The arguments grew louder until the apartment neighbors knocked to complain. Chris told her she needed to leave before the situation became worse. She refused. She said she wasn't being forced out of a room where everyone was conspiring against her. When Kaylee tried to walk past her to go home, Tessa lunged at her. Chris caught her mid-step and pulled her back while Brad yelled for her to stop. The chaos became embarrassing in a way that strips people of their last pieces of dignity. Security wasn't called, but Chris physically guided her to the door. She screamed that none of us understood her and that everyone had betrayed her. When the door slammed behind her, the silence felt like a collapsed building. The room stayed quiet for a long minute. Then Morgan texted me, saying she had overheard Tessa telling someone over the phone that she regretted being caught, but didn't regret testing things. Morgan said she was done cleaning up her sister's messes. That message sealed everything. The truth wasn't that I caught a moment of confusion at a restaurant. The truth was that I caught a pattern I should have noticed sooner. Kaylee eventually gathered her belongings and said she hadn't made a final decision about Brad, but needed space. Brad tried to speak to her again, but she lifted her hand and told him she couldn't think straight with him nearby. She left without looking back. Brad turned to me then and asked if there was anything he could do. I told him I didn't have an answer yet. I wasn't ready to forgive or stay angry. I was somewhere in between, stuck in a quiet middle ground where everything is cracked but hasn't fallen apart yet. By the time I drove home that evening, the only thing I knew for certain was that whatever happened next wouldn't resemble anything from the life I had before last night. I wasn't interested in pretending I still had an engagement. I wasn't interested in pretending I still had a best friend. I wasn't interested in pretending anything looked the same. The truth had already burned through every part of the foundation. All that was left was dealing with the fallout. The day after the confrontation at Chris's apartment, I woke up with the kind of clarity people get only after a disaster burns everything unnecessary away. I didn't want discussions. I didn't want perspective. I didn't want damage control dressed as reconciliation. I wanted an ending. A clean one. A final one. I had seen enough to know I couldn't keep dragging the situation forward under the illusion that there was anything left to protect. The first thing I did was cancel everything related to the wedding. No hesitation. No wavering. I called the venue, the catering company, the photographer, and the DJ. Each conversation felt like removing another thread connecting me to a future that now looked absurd. The coordinators all asked if I was sure. They asked if I wanted to postpone instead. I didn't. I told them clearly the engagement was over. By midday, every vendor emailed confirmation. With each cancellation, the weight on my chest eased, replaced by something that felt almost like relief. I knew Tessa would eventually hear about the cancellations, but she didn't need to hear it secondhand. I wanted to tell her myself, face to face, where she wouldn't be able to twist my words into something useful for herself. I texted her to meet me at my place that evening. She replied within seconds, like she'd been waiting for even the smallest opening. Her answer said she would come as soon as she figured out transportation. That last part made me pause. It meant she wasn't at her apartment. I didn't ask where she had stayed. I didn't want the details. When she arrived, she stepped inside like she still belonged there. She looked tired but determined, the way she always looked when she believed she could talk her way back into control. She tried to hug me. I stepped back. She stood still for a moment, pretending she understood, even though her eyes flickered with annoyance. She asked if we could sit. I remained standing. I told her the engagement was officially canceled and the vendors had been notified. For a second, she didn't react at all. Then she laughed in disbelief, as if she thought I was bluffing. When she saw that I wasn't joking, her expression hardened. She asked why I didn't wait until we talked. She said she deserved the chance to explain. I told her she had been given every chance to explain. She just never used a single one of them honestly. She started pacing, talking fast, throwing out every justification she had left. She said the foot incident at the restaurant meant nothing. She said I was interpreting things too severely. She said Brad was lying to protect himself. She said Kaylee was jealous of her. She said her mother exaggerated her past. She said Morgan was trying to ruin her life. Every sentence circled away from accountability. When she realized her explanations were collapsing, she switched tactics. She said she loved me. She said the wedding meant everything to her. She said she was scared of losing me because she wasn't sure she was good enough. She said the same lines she used whenever she needed forgiveness. Not real remorse. Just desperation dressed as affection. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply told her that love didn't look like what she had done. Love didn't involve testing boundaries to see how far she could push before someone broke. Love didn't involve secret messages, emotional games, and manufactured confusion. She opened her mouth to argue again, but I held up my hand and told her there was nothing left to discuss. That silence hit her harder than any accusation could have. She asked if there was someone else. The question was ridiculous, but it showed where her mind lived, in deflection, deflection, deflection. I told her no. She asked if Brad had made something up to sabotage her. I told her she was responsible for her own actions. She asked if Kaylee had convinced me to break things off. I told her the moment under the table was all the convincing I ever needed. Her face twisted in frustration. She accused me of abandoning her when she needed support. She said her entire family was angry with her, and I was supposed to be the person who stood by her. For a moment, she made herself look small, like she hoped I would step in to help her rebuild the facade. Then the final crack appeared. She said none of what happened was her fault because she had never done anything physical. She said everything was overblown and she shouldn't be punished for something that didn't even go further. That statement was the final confirmation that I had made the right decision. She genuinely didn't understand that boundaries could be broken without physical contact. If anything, she thought the lack of physical intimacy made her actions harmless. I told her to take the remaining boxes she left at my place and arrange for the rest later. I said she could come with a friend or her family, but she wasn't staying here another night. Her expression hardened into that cold, distant look I had seen her use when she judged strangers or dismissed people she didn't need. She picked up her bag and walked toward the door, muttering something about how I would regret making decisions in anger. Before she left, she turned back and said that if I cared about her at all, I would reconsider. I didn't answer. She stepped outside and closed the door with a soft click, not a dramatic slam. That soft, final sound felt like a line drawn straight through the middle of everything we once planned. In the days that followed, the consequences unfolded quickly. Kaylee broke up with Brad officially. She moved out of their apartment and stayed with her cousin. She told me she wasn't going to waste another year rebuilding trust that had already fractured beyond repair. Brad tried to reach out to both of us, hoping for some kind of redemption, but he received nothing except silence from her and distance from me. He wasn't a villain in the traditional sense, but he was careless in a way that destroyed people who cared about him. That was enough. Tessa moved back in with her parents temporarily. That arrangement fell apart within a week. Morgan called me one evening and said Tessa had gotten into a screaming match with their mother over what happened, insisting everyone was against her. Dana later contacted me to apologize for not being honest sooner about her daughter's past. She said she hoped Tessa would finally learn from this, though she didn't sound convinced. Word eventually got around that Tessa lost her job after arguing with her supervisor in a meeting. According to Morgan, she had been unstable at work for months, and the restaurant incident pushed her manager to stop overlooking the tension she caused. As for me, I didn't rush into anything new. I didn't try to patch the void with rebound relationships or nights out pretending to be fine. I took time to rebuild my life in a quieter, steadier way. My friends stayed close, and nobody tiptoed around the situation. Chris and a few others helped me reorganize my apartment, removing things that reminded me of wedding plans. I returned the ring to the jeweler and used the refund to pay off wedding-related deposits. There was no dramatic new beginning, no sudden burst of freedom. Just relief. Real relief. The kind that grows slowly after stepping away from something corrosive. Life didn't improve instantly, but it became lighter, calmer, and more honest. That was enough.